What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses finds herself in the middle of a heated confrontation on live television? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive moment that had Cameron Diaz walking off Jimmy Kimmel live in what can only be described as one of the most uncomfortable celebrity interviews ever captured on camera. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as a routine promotional appearance quickly spiraled into something nobody saw coming. But before we get into all the jaw-dropping details, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really caused this entire situation to blow up the way it did. The evening started like any other taping of Jimmy Kimmel Live. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement, knowing they were about to witness Cameron Diaz promoting her latest project. She walked onto the stage with her trademark smile, waving to the crowd as Jimmy stood up from his desk to greet her. The applause was thunderous, just as you'd expect for someone of her caliber. She looked radiant in a sleek black dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and there was nothing in her demeanor that suggested what was about to unfold. "Diaz, everybody," Jimmy announced as she settled into the guest chair. "Thank you so much for being here tonight. You look absolutely stunning as always." Cameron smiled graciously, crossing her legs and adjusting her position in the chair. "Thank you, Jimmy. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this." The conversation began. Innocuously enough, Jimmy asked about her latest film, a romantic comedy that had been generating positive buzz in early screenings. Cameron spoke enthusiastically about working with her co-star, the challenges of filming in various locations, and the fun she'd had on set. Her responses were polished, professional, and filled with the kind of charming anecdotes that make for good television. "So tell me about this scene where you're hanging upside down from a helicopter," Jimmy said, leaning forward with genuine interest. "That looked absolutely terrifying in the trailer." Cameron laughed, her eyes lighting up. "Oh my God, that was actually one of the most exhilarating things I've ever done. We had the best stunt coordinators, and I felt completely safe the entire time. Though I have to admit, being upside down for that long definitely gave me a new perspective on things." The audience chuckled at her wordplay, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. Jimmy nodded approvingly, clearly pleased with how the interview was progressing. He moved on to ask about her preparation for the role, and Cameron dove into a detailed explanation of how she'd worked with dialect coaches and studied the character's background. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in Jimmy's tone when he asked his next question. Now, I have to ask Cameron, because I think a lot of people are curious about this. There's been quite a bit of speculation about your personal life lately, and I'm wondering if you'd like to set the record straight about some of these rumors." Cameron's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "Well, Jimmy, you know how it is in this business. People love to speculate, and I've learned that it's usually best to just focus on the work." "Right, but some of these stories have been pretty persistent," Jimmy pressed, and there was something in his voice that suggested he wasn't going to let this go easily, particularly the ones about your relationship status and some of the choices you've made recently. The audience seemed to sense the shift in energy. The laughter died down, and you could feel the tension beginning to build. Cameron's posture stiffened slightly, and her smile became more forced. "I'm not really sure what you're referring to, Jimmy," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm here to talk about my movie, and I think that's what your audience is interested in hearing about." But Jimmy wasn't backing down. "Come on, Cameron. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The photos, the statements you've made, the way you've been handling certain situations. Don't you think your fans deserve some honesty?" Cameron's eyes flashed with something that looked like anger, but she kept her voice steady. "I think my fans deserve to see me do good work, and that's what I'm focused on. If you want to talk about the film, I'm happy to do that. If not, then maybe we should move on to something else." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unexpected. Jimmy glanced at his cards, then back at Cameron, and it was clear he was making a decision about how far to push this. "Look, I'm not trying to ambush you here," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But when you make the kinds of statements you've been making, and when you take the positions you've been taking, it becomes news. And news is something we talk about on this show." Cameron's jaw tightened visibly. "What positions are you talking about, Jimmy? What statements? Because I think you might be confusing me with someone else." Or maybe you're getting your information from sources that aren't exactly reliable. I'm talking about your comments regarding the industry, your criticism of certain practices, and the way you've been very vocal about things that maybe you shouldn't be vocal about. Jimmy replied, his voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there before. The camera caught Cameron's reaction perfectly. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time since she'd sat down, her composure cracked slightly. Things I shouldn't be vocal about. Jimmy, I'm a grown woman, and I have every right to speak my mind about issues that matter to me. Of course you do, Jimmy said, raising his hands in a gesture that seemed more condescending than conciliatory. But you also have to understand that when you're in the public eye, your words carry weight. And some of the things you've been saying have been pretty controversial. Cameron leaned forward in her chair, her voice becoming sharper. Controversial to who? To the people who benefit from keeping things the way they are. To the people who don't want to hear uncomfortable truths. The tension in the room was palpable now. Jimmy's producer could be seen in the background looking concerned, while the audience sat in stunned silence. This was clearly not going according to plan. I'm just saying, Jimmy continued, that maybe it would be better if you focused on your career instead of getting involved in all these political issues. Your fans want to see you in movies, not on soapboxes. Cameron's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face flushed, and she gripped the arms of her chair tightly. Political issues. Jimmy, we're talking about basic human decency here. We're talking about treating people with respect and standing up for what's right. If you think that's political, then maybe the problem isn't with me. But don't you think, Jimmy pressed, leaning back in his chair with what appeared to be a smug expression, that celebrities should stay in their lane? That maybe you should stick to what you know instead of trying to be some kind of activist? The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Cameron's response would determine whether this interview could be salvaged or if it was about to go completely off the rails. Cameron's eyes blazed with an intensity that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. The woman who had walked onto the stage with a radiant smile was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she was barely containing her fury. "Stay in my lane," she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Jimmy, let me tell you something about lanes. My lane isn't just making movies and looking pretty for magazine covers. My lane is being a human being who gives a damn about the world." Around her, Jimmy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, perhaps realizing he'd pushed too far, but Cameron wasn't finished. "You want to talk about lanes? Let's talk about your lane, Jimmy. Your lane is supposed to be entertaining people, making them laugh, maybe asking some thoughtful questions. But instead, you're sitting here trying to silence me because I have the audacity to care about something." Beyond box office numbers, the audience was completely transfixed. This wasn't the polished, media-trained celebrity they'd expected to see. This was raw, unfiltered emotion, and you could feel the energy crackling through the studio. Jimmy attempted to regain control of the situation. "Cameron, I think you're overreacting here. I'm not trying to silence anyone. I'm just suggesting that maybe there are more appropriate forums for these discussions." More appropriate forums. Cameron's voice rose slightly, her composure slipping further. "You mean forums where fewer people are watching? Where my voice carries less weight? How convenient for the people who want to maintain the status quo." She stood up from her chair, pacing slightly within the small space of the interview area. The camera operators scrambled to adjust their angles, clearly not prepared for this level of mobility from a guest. "You know what I find fascinating, Jimmy? When male actors speak out about issues they care about, they're called passionate, they're called leaders. But when a woman does it, suddenly she's being too political. She's overstepping. She needs to stay in her lane." Jimmy's face reddened slightly. "That's not what this is about, and you know it." "This has nothing to do with gender, doesn't it?" Cameron challenged, turning to face him directly. "Because I've watched you have male guests on this show who've talked about everything from foreign policy to economic theory, and you never once suggested they should stick to acting. But here I am, trying to use my platform to advocate for basic human rights, and suddenly, I'm the problem." The tension was reaching a breaking point. Jimmy glanced toward his producer, who was making frantic gestures from behind the cameras, but Cameron caught the exchange. "Are you looking for help, Jimmy? Are you hoping someone's going to come save you from the difficult woman who won't? Just smile and promote her movie like a good little actress." "Cameron, please," Jimmy said, his voice taking on a pleading tone. Can we just get back to the interview? This isn't what anyone wants to see. What anyone wants to see. Cameron's laugh was bitter. What you mean is, this isn't what you want to see. You want me to be compliant, agreeable, easy to handle. You want me to giggle at your jokes and tell cute stories about my co-stars? But that's not who I am, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to make you comfortable. The studio audience was completely silent now, watching this verbal battle unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed riveted, but nobody was looking away. Jimmy made another attempt to steer the conversation. Look, I respect your passion, I really do. But this is a late-night talk show, not a political debate. People tune in to be entertained, to forget about their problems for a while. And there it is, Cameron said, snapping her fingers. There's the real issue. You think caring about injustice is a problem people need to forget about. You think advocating for change is something that should be kept separate from entertainment, as if the two exist in completely different worlds. She moved closer to Jimmy's desk, her intensity palpable. But here's the thing, Jimmy. Those problems, you want people to forget about, they're affecting real people every single day. And if someone like me, with a platform and a voice, doesn't speak up, then who will? Jimmy's response was defensive. There are plenty of people speaking up. Politicians, activists, journalists, that's their job. Their job. Cameron's voice was incredulous. So speaking up for what's right is only the job of certain people. Everyone else should just shut up and stay in their designated roles. That's not how change happens, Jimmy. That's how systems of oppression maintain themselves. The exchange was becoming increasingly heated, and Jimmy seemed to be losing patience. With Cameron's refusal to back down, you know what, Cameron? Maybe the problem is that you think being famous gives you some kind of special insight into these issues. Maybe you think your opinion matters more than everyone else's. Cameron's face went pale with anger. Are you seriously suggesting that I think I'm better than other people? That I'm some kind of elitist who looks down on regular folks? I'm suggesting, Jimmy said, his voice growing harder, that maybe you've been living in a bubble for so long that you've lost touch with what regular people actually want and need. The accusation hung in the air like a slap. Cameron stood, perfectly still for a moment, processing what had just been said to her. When she spoke again, her voice was deadly calm. A bubble, Jimmy. You think I live in a bubble? Let me tell you about bubbles. A bubble is thinking that you can invite someone onto your show and then attack them for having convictions. A bubble is believing that entertainment and social responsibility are mutually exclusive. A bubble is sitting behind that desk and telling women what they should and shouldn't care about. Jimmy's jaw clenched. I'm not attacking you, Cameron. I'm asking legitimate questions that I think the audience deserves answers to. Legitimate questions. Cameron's composure was hanging by a thread. You call suggesting that I'm out of touch and elitist a legitimate question. You call telling me to stay in my lane. Journalism. She shook her head in disgust. You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight to talk about a movie I'm proud of, to share something positive with your audience. But instead, you decided to turn this into some kind of gotcha moment. You decided to use your platform to try to diminish mine. The audience could sense that something was about to break. The tension had been building steadily, and Cameron looked like she was on the verge of either exploding or walking away. Jimmy seemed to realize he'd pushed too far, but his next words only made things worse. Look, Cameron, maybe we should just agree to disagree and move on. Let's talk about something else. Cameron stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with controlled breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with determination. No, Jimmy. We're not going to just move on. We're not going to pretend this didn't happen. You made a choice tonight to use your show as a platform to attack me for having opinions, for caring about issues that matter. And I'm not going to sit here and let you sweep that under the rug. The confrontation was reaching its climax, and everyone in the studio could feel that something irreversible was about to happen. Cameron took a step back from Jimmy's desk, her posture straightening as she seemed to gather herself for what was coming next. The studio lights cast sharp shadows across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes. You know what the real problem is here, Jimmy, she said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone lean forward. The real problem is that you're so uncomfortable with a woman who refuses to be diminished that you'd rather attack her character than engage with her ideas. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Cameron held up a hand to stop him. Me finish. You've spent this entire interview trying to make me smaller, trying to put me back in the box you think I belong in. But here's what you don't understand. I didn't claw my way to where I am in this industry just to sit quietly and look pretty when things matter. Her voice grew stronger with each word. You want to know what's really in my lane? Standing up. For people who don't have the platform I have, using my voice when others are being silenced. Refusing to be complicit in systems that hurt vulnerable people. That's not me overstepping, Jimmy. That's me being exactly who I'm supposed to be. The audience was completely captivated. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. This was a masterclass in standing up for yourself under pressure. Jimmy tried once more to regain control. Cameron, I think you're taking this way too personally. This is just a conversation. Just a conversation. Cameron's laugh was sharp and humorless. Jimmy, you invited me here under the pretense of promoting my work, and then you ambushed me with loaded questions designed to make me look bad. You questioned my right to have opinions, suggested I was out of touch, and told me to stay in my lane. That's not a conversation. That's an attack. She moved closer to the desk again, her intensity radiating through the studio. And you know what the most insulting part of all this is? You're doing it while sitting behind a desk on a show that gives you a platform to influence millions of people every single night. You're lecturing me about staying in my lane, while you use your lane to try to silence mine? Jimmy's face was flushed now, and his voice took on an edge of frustration. I'm not trying to silence anyone, Cameron. I'm just pointing out that maybe there are consequences to some of the things you've been saying. Consequences. Cameron's voice rose dangerously. Are you threatening me, Jimmy? Are you suggesting that I should be afraid of speaking my mind? Because there might be consequences. The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to stop moving, afraid they might miss something crucial. I'm not threatening anyone, Jimmy said quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm just saying that when you take controversial positions, people are going to push back. People like you, Cameron shot back. People who would rather maintain the status quo than deal with uncomfortable truths. People who think that celebrity should come with a gag order on anything that might make audiences think too hard. Jimmy's composure was cracking. That's not fair, Cameron. You're twisting my words, am I? Cameron's voice was like steel. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're doing exactly what people in power always do when someone challenges the system. You're trying to discredit me, to make me seem unreasonable, to turn the audience against me so they'll dismiss everything I'm saying. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. But here's what you didn't count on, Jimmy. I didn't get to where I am by backing down when things got difficult. I didn't build my career by letting men tell me what I should and shouldn't care about. The camera caught every nuance of her expression as she continued. You thought you could bring me on here and embarrass me, make me look foolish for having convictions. But all you've done is show everyone exactly what we're up against. You've provided a perfect example of how women are treated when they refuse to be quiet and compliant. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Cameron, please, can we just start over? This has gotten completely out of hand. Cameron stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with disappointment rather than anger. Start over, Jimmy. You can't unsay what you've said. You can't undo the fact that you used your platform to try to diminish mine. You can't take back the moment when you told me to stay in my lane simply because you're uncomfortable with the lane I've chosen. She began to remove her microphone, her movements deliberate and purposeful. You know what I find most tragic about this whole situation? You had an opportunity tonight to have a real conversation about things that matter. You could have used your platform to explore important issues, to maybe help your audience think about the world in new ways. The microphone came free, and she set it down on the small table beside her chair. Instead, you chose to use it to try to silence someone who's fighting for positive change. You chose to be part of the problem instead of part of the solution. Jimmy looked panicked now, realizing that his show was about to fall apart on live television. Cameron, please don't do this. Let's just talk this through. Talk it through. Cameron's voice was incredulous. Jimmy, we just spent the last 20 minutes talking it through. And what I learned is that you're not interested in actual dialogue. You're interested in maintaining your comfort zone, even if it means attacking someone who's trying to make a difference. She stood up from her chair, smoothing down her dress with a dignity that was both devastating and admirable. I came here tonight to share something I'm passionate about with your audience. But I won't sit here and be lectured about staying in my lane by someone who's clearly never questioned whether his own lane is the right one. The studio audience was frozen, watching this unprecedented moment unfold. Some looked shocked, others seemed to be processing what they'd just witnessed, but nobody was looking away. Jimmy made one final plea. "Cameron, you're making a mistake. This isn't how you want people to remember this interview." Cameron paused at the edge of the interview area, turning back to face him one last time. "You're right, Jimmy. This isn't how I wanted this to go. I wanted to come here and talk about art, about creativity, about the joy of storytelling. But you made a different choice." Her voice grew stronger as she delivered her final words. "You chose to make this about trying to put me in my place, about reminding me that having opinions comes with a price." Well, here's my response to that. I'd rather pay the price of speaking my truth than accept the comfort of staying silent. She looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience at home. To everyone watching, remember that your voice matters. Don't let anyone tell you to stay in your lane if your lane is fighting for what's right. Don't let anyone convince you that caring about justice is somehow inappropriate or unseemly. Then she turned and walked toward the stage exit, her heels clicking against the floor in the absolute silence of the studio. Jimmy sat frozen behind his desk, clearly unsure of what to do next. The producers were scrambling, the audience was stunned, and the cameras kept rolling as Cameron Diaz disappeared behind the curtain. The show cut to commercial break, but the damage was done. In the span of less than 30 minutes, what should have been a routine promotional interview had turned into a defining moment about standing up for your convictions, refusing to be silenced, and the price of speaking truth to power. The confrontation had ended, but the conversation it started would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling. Cameron had made her choice, and in doing so, she'd reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most important lane you can stay in is the one that leads toward justice, even when the journey gets uncomfortable. What did you think about Cameron's decision to walk away? Was she right to stand her ground, or should she have handled the situation differently? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.